make sure that we are getting sound, because I think somebody screwed with the microphone again. So let me just make sure that that we are actually test. Okay. That is working. So I saved the best for last. Today is the most, I mean, I think all of these issues are really interesting and important and worthy of discussion. But for most students, today is the most fun day that we have because we talk about ads. And ads are something that are just enormously, we hate watching them when we're watching our shows, but they're fun to watch. I mean, and that's one, I mean, people who don't watch the Super Bowl, who don't watch football, watch the Super Bowl for the ads every year. I mean, people who don't like football watch the Super Bowl just for the ads. And we anticipate these ads. Now they've started releasing the ads early, and so there isn't as big a deal around the Super Bowl, but it's, you know, the most expensive day in advertising. And there's all of this buildup, and so ads are enormously fun. This is the fun part of marketing, and this is the part of marketing. We'll also talk about place, which is the part of marketing that nobody thinks of as being marketing, and it is, which is a little bit more boring, but I'll try and make it as interesting, and it will just sort of be the shortest topic that we talk about because we're at the end of the class. And next week, we obviously won't have class because it's the final, right? It's final exam, so we have those going on, so we won't meet as a regular at our regularly scheduled time as a class for that. So the place part of marketing is the part that's logistics and how we get products to consumers, and it's the part that nobody ever thinks of as being part of marketing. It's actually the oldest subfield of marketing, and it's generally the one that students like the least. It's the most boring, sort of the operations management side of the marketing perspective. But this one, with regard to advertisement promotion, is the most fun, and it's the one that people actually think of as being marketing. A lot of people don't think of product development as being marketing, even though it is, but they clearly think of advertising as being marketing because that's what we're exposed to. And so that's what that everybody thinks when you ask them what marketing is, they think of it as being advertising and promotion. So it's the third P in the 4 P's of marketing, and we are inundated with this stuff constantly. This is one of the reasons why when I teach principles of marketing, I say that marketing is a pervasive social activity. You can't escape it because everywhere you go, you are constantly being marketed to. I have a logo on my shirt. It says UCO. That's marketing, right? I mean, it's telling people, you know, something about me, that I have some connection to the University of Central Oklahoma. You've got something on your cap.
Brand.
It's a what?
Duck hunting brand.
It's a duck hunting brand, which brand is it?
It's called Back Down South.
Okay. So, and what do they manufacture? I mean, I have a clothes
and stuff for hunting.
Do they manufacture duck calls?
Yeah.
Do they?
They sell them at least. I know that. Yeah.
Okay. I've got like a lot of old duck calls from my grandfather that I inherited. I don't actually go hunting anymore because he died, and I'd rather go shoot sporting clays now. I prefer to think of the animal as just having fallen over dead and ending up on my plate. But you got something on your, it looks like a Mercedes-Benz logo on your jacket. So we're constantly inundated with these marketing symbols, these brand identities, things like that. And it's enormously important in marketing to get these right. So, and advertising is a big portion of how we let people know about our products and how we maintain our brand image. So we're going to look at some ads, but before we look at the ads, and some of these are really great ads, what do you think makes an ad great? And by the way, I've got at least one person watching the live stream. I've got 2 people watching the live stream. So I'm going to ask you, if you're watching the live stream, if it goes out, what happens is YouTube, in the early days of YouTube, when I first started doing this, I could play videos and YouTube wouldn't catch it, but they've gotten really, really sensitive to copyright issues. So if it goes out, would you text me at 405-414-7054 so that I can restart the live stream after the videos are over? Because I don't think it'll catch it because the video is actually on me and not on the screen. But if I pointed at the screen or if it thinks that I'm violating copyright, a lot of times it will turn it off, even though obviously advertisements they're copywritten, but they're intended to be shared. I mean, the more people watch it, the more your product is known. Although I'm not sure that the advertisers that we're going to talk about today necessarily want me playing their ads because, we're going to be critical of the ads. And at least one of the companies I think is, well, two of them are probably gone. So it's not really a big issue there. But so what do you think makes an ad great? What makes an ad interesting for you?
I think they're seasonal.
They're what?
Like seasonal, like you find like a lot of Christmassy
Okay,
ads around this time
so
of year.
you think that it has to have some temporal aspect to it, that it's got to be relevant. So you don't see Christmas, although they start putting stuff out for Halloween in July. And by Halloween, I mean, it's like Thanksgiving just doesn't exist anymore in the retail world. They start putting stuff out right after 4th of July for Halloween. And by the time Halloween rolls around, I mean, they put out stuff. It used to be that the week of Thanksgiving is when they start putting stuff out for Christmas. No, like the minute school starts, the minute back to school is over, they're putting stuff out for Christmas anymore. They start putting out lights and all of that. And people start decorating. My niece, we were driving past her other aunt and uncle's house. That's her mother's. So I'm her father's brother. Her mother's sister already had 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, and they're Jewish, right? I mean, we're Jewish. So, I mean, I put out Christmas stuff because I have a business and people sort of expect that. So my house is all decorated for Christmas, but we're Jewish. Most Jews don't decorate for Christmas. Her aunt obviously does. And my niece says, oh, God, they're one of those people, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, and they've already got all the Christmas lights out and on and a Christmas tree up in the front yard and all of this other stuff. So we sort of blow past that. So you think that there's got to be some temporal thing. Normally, we don't start advertising for Christmas in July, for example, in the middle of summer when it's hot, although they start putting the stuff out, earlier and earlier every year. So you think there's got to be some temporal aspect. What about products that don't have a temporal? Like one of the things that we're going to watch is an ad for a cancer center. Obviously, people get cancer. It's not like cancer takes a break on Christmas. People find out that they're getting cancer at that time. What else makes an ad great? So there's some timeliness issue. What else makes an ad relevant to you?
Meaningfulness and
Oh, get a
a connection.
Okay, making a connection to you.
And being meaningful.
Okay. What makes something meaningful to you?
I would think just having something that may hit you a little harder than some other person.
Okay, emotion.
Yes, yeah.
An emotional aspect. So, which do you think is a bigger motivator? There's lots of emotions that we can have, and lots of ads, and one of the ones that we like a lot of times are funny.
Right.
You think funny ads are better than other kinds of ads? Some research suggests that they're not terribly effective. We like them, they're entertaining, but if you had to choose between a motivator, fear or humor, which do you think?
Probably fear.
Fear is probably a bigger motivator. Is it better? This is an age-old debate in political science. Is it better to be feared or to be loved? Machiavelli talks about this in The Prince. Very short work of political philosophy. It's the birth, by the way, of modernity. We talked about this at the beginning. The Prince, the Quattrocento, is the birth of modernity, the discovery of the new world, and Machiavelli's The Prince mark the birth of the modern in most historians' minds. And what makes The Prince thoroughly modern? It separates politics from the sacred. It separates, historically, we tied government to religion, the divine right of kings. You were elected by God, basically, to rule. And Machiavelli does away with all that and says, this is just the way power actually operates. It has nothing to do with God. So ethics for The Prince are different than ethics for you or I, for example. So Machiavelli asked, is it better to be feared or to be loved? Well, it's better to be feared, probably, than to be loved. Love is a fickle thing, isn't it? By the way, the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference. Hatred is the same, it's a very thin line on the same side of the coin as love. It's an enormously intense emotion. But the opposite truly is indifference. When you come to the point where you no longer just care whether or not that individual even exists, that's the opposite of love. But love is a fickle thing. It's easy to go from love to hate. Those emotions are enormously intense. So there's an emotional aspect to advertising. What else? What else makes an ad great?
They're creative.
Creative. Okay, so you can get another die. So it's got to be creative. All right, I think we've got this. Yeah. So the research suggests that there are a couple things that make ads great. One, and this is the creative aspect, it engages the mind of the consumer. So great ads engage the mind of the consumer. And then two, they deliver a selling message. They make you want to go out and buy the product. Now, a lot of award-winning ads actually are very creative, but they don't deliver a selling message. Let's take a look at one that I think does this really, really well. It engages the mind of the consumer. Again, if you are out there and it stops playing because it recognizes that I'm playing something, text me. I'm going to try and watch it and make sure that it doesn't go off. But if it does, I'll have to restart the video after I finish playing the ads. If you're watching the live stream, the ads that I'm going to play so that you can Google them if you want to watch them while either the live stream is going on in case it goes off or at another time, or if you Google EDS herding cats commercial, that's the first one we're going to watch. The second one we're going to watch is called the Wolves ad. It's the Bush Cheney ad from I think 2004, and you can just Google George W. Bush Wolves commercial and it should come up on YouTube. And the third one is Cancer Treatment Centers of America, Peggy Reflex. So let's watch the first one.
This man right here is my great-grandfather. He's the first cat herder in our family. Herding cats. Don't let anybody tell you it's easy. Anybody can herd cattle. Holding together 10,000 half-wild short hairs. Well, that's another thing altogether. Being a cat herder is probably about the toughest thing I think I've ever done.
I got this one this morning, right here. And if you look at his face, it just ripped to shreds, you know?
You see the movies, you hear the stories. I'm living a dream. Not everyone can do what we do.
I wouldn't do nothing else.
It ain't an easy job, but when you bring a herd into town and you ain't lost to one of them, ain't no feeling like it in the world.
EDS, managing the complexities of the digital economy.
All right. That was an award-winning ad. It was a Super Bowl ad one year. It engages the mind of the consumer. How does it engage the mind of the consumer?
Kind of like, I'm not sure like oxymoron's the right word, but like you have cowboys that are typically herding much larger animals.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of herding cats is, I mean, you've got these rough, tough cowboys out there, and nobody thinks of cats as being I mean, like, cats are sort of viewed as, they're, the typical view is, if you do this sort of informal study with people, watch about how they will refer to a cat. It's always as she. They always assume, they default dogs, unless they're little dogs that are fluffy little dogs. They always assume they always say, good boy, right? I mean, you're a good boy. You go up to somebody who's got a dog and they're like, you're a good boy. They always assume that dogs are sort of masculine and cats are sort of feminine. I mean, obviously they're not. I mean, there are male cats. Obviously, that's how reproduction works. But yeah, you've got these rough and tough cowboys, you know, look at his face, it's just torn to shreds. And what you associate with cowboys in the American West is herding cattle. Right? And that's what they do. They herd cattle. The iconic images of the cattle drives, bringing, you know, large herds into Fort Worth and the stockyards in Oklahoma City and places like that where cattle were traded. And now you've got this, you know, herding little cats and they're out there on the range and bringing a herd of long hairs in. It creates this interesting idea in the mind of the consumer because this part of American history, although it existed for an enormously short period of time, this Wild West attitude that we have, and we play to it constantly. Here in Oklahoma City, we have a theme park that's dedicated to this. I mean, this really occurred at a very, very small period in American history. The vast majority of American history was not about people, you know, going west and herding and things like that. That was a very short period of our actual history. A bigger portion of our history has been, you know, dedicated to, you know, farming on the East Coast and things like that, not actually, you know, herding anything out in the deserts of the Southwest. But it's one that lives on, and it's one that we cling to. It's an image that is really uniquely, in many respects, American. This idea of the rancher and moving west. So you've got this iconic American image of the cowboy, and you combine it with something that is a juxtaposition, which is cats, which is not something that most people think of. And it engages the mind of the consumer. Does it deliver a selling message? I don't think that ad did. Most people couldn't remember what the ad was for. When they polled people after, 24 hours after, they had no idea that it was EDS. EDS is an interesting company. It was founded by a billionaire called Ross Perot. And during the Iran hostage crisis, he had some employees that were actually captured in Iran, and he hired his own team of mercenaries to go in and free them. And I believe there was a book written about it. It was something, or the title is something like On the Wings of Eagles. And it talks about Ross Perot. So he was this little itty bitty short guy. He ran for president against Bill Clinton and George W. Bush as an independent. And he had these huge ears. And in one of the debate, he's like, well, if anybody has a better idea about how this, he brought all these charts and graphs to the debates. And he would talk, he'd say, if anybody else has any better ideas about how to solve this problem, well, I'm all ears. And he had these, you know, these huge, big ears. I actually got to meet him one time. He lived in Dallas. He was from Texas. And I got to meet him in North Park Mall in the Dallas area, which is a very exclusive sort of area of the Dallas-Fort Worth metro. And I think that's where he lived, was in that sort of area around SMU's campus. So, you know, it's a compelling ad, but I don't know that it delivers a selling message. It uses humor. I'm not sure that humor is always the best method of getting people motivated, although there are products that you can't use fear. I mean, if you're selling Cheetos, for example, the Cheetos commercials are oftentimes, they've advertised these during the Super Bowl, oftentimes funny, very, very funny ads. Cheetos is kind of a fun product. It's a snack food. It's not healthy for you. I mean, it's hard to motivate people with fear and trying to eat Cheetos. Let's look at a political campaign ad. This is the Bush-Cheney ad.
World. In an increasingly dangerous world, even after the first terrorist attack on America, John Kerry and the liberals in Congress voted to slash America's intelligence operations by $6 billion. Cuts so deep they would have weakened America's defenses. And weakness attracts those who are waiting to do America harm.
I'm George W. Bush, and I approve this message.
That one, it engages the mind of the consumer. You have this forest, it's kind of dark, it's misty, and it's kind of creepy and scary. And it delivers a selling message. What is the selling message? Go vote for me. Fear works in politics. It's one of the reasons that we've elected a lot of leaders. If you're going to use fear, though, you have to provide hope, right? So what you have to do is, in order to use fear as a motivator, you have to offer something that provides hope, which brings me to my third commercial. And this is probably the most ethically problematic. The Herding Cats, now what EDS did is it was a data company, and the Herding Cats, they're using humor to try and motivate people. I'm not sure it was effective. Nobody remembered what the company was. Although I will tell you that my cousin, who is a computer programmer, says that the Herding Cats analogy is used a lot in the computer programming. So maybe it actually motivated the people or targeted the people that it was actually intended to, and they would remember that. The fear factor is more problematic. And I think in the Wolves ad, we see this in that George W. Bush is trying to get people to go and vote for him based purely on a gut reaction to what he thinks the Democrats are going to do to the, security of America. This one, I think, one of the things I think the Wolf ad fails to do, though, is it doesn't explicitly tell you that this is the hope. Like, vote for me and I will keep America safe, right? It leaves it to the imagination of the consumer to come to that conclusion on their own. I'm not sure that in a highly technically sophisticated world in which we are fed information and used to having things in 30-second sound bites, that you have to make the loop or close the loop yourself. This one is particularly, I think, effective.
It's hard to believe it's been
Before I play this ad, I'll give you the background. The first ad, she did 2 ads for CTCA. The first ad was, and this woman's name is Peggy Kessler. She is sitting in, in like a studio. It's obviously black. There's a black screen behind her. And she's like, I went to my doctor and he said, Peggy, you have pancreatic cancer. And she said, well, what do we do? And he's like, Peggy, you're going to die. And she says, and then I went to CTCA and, they saved my life. I will tell you that if you have pancreatic cancer, the chances are pretty good that you're going to die. I have a cousin who is what we call a mud FUD. I'm a Judd FUD, a JD PhD. He has an MD PhD. And his research stream is oncology. And in particular, it deals with pancreatic cancer. And he said when he went into the field, he thought that they were going to be the ones that would cure pancreatic cancer. There's almost no cure for it. There are sort of, as I understand it, I'm not an oncologist, but as I understand it from talking with him, basically, and I'm sure again, medical oncologists would be horrified at my oversimplification of this, there's sort of 2 types of pancreatic cancer. The most common type is you get it and you're dead within a number of months. And it happened to 2 of my colleagues here at UCO very shortly after in the College of Business. And it was like back to back. One retired 1 year, and within 3 months, he had gotten pancreatic cancer and died. Or they discovered that he had pancreatic cancer and died. The second one, it happened the year after. He retired a year later, and almost a year to the day, as the first colleague that I had, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and he died. One of the things that makes pancreatic cancer so difficult is that there's almost, as I understand it, again, I'm not a medical oncologist, there are almost no symptoms until it's in the very late stages of the disease. But it's also enormously, even if they catch it early, it's enormously difficult to cure. So there's sort of 2 kinds. One kind is slower and it can actually kind of go into remission. The second kind is, you get diagnosed and within a very rapid period of time, you're gone. Peggy apparently had a kind that was more amenable to treatment, and she lived a long time. But I will tell you that CTCA pulled the ads about a year. I think they've actually gone broke or they're in bankruptcy now. They pulled the ads because Peggy died of pancreatic cancer shortly after this second ad was made. So this is the second ad.
since I made that commercial. And now I'm a 10-year survivor.
Today's a special day, a big milestone to me. I'm out here riding my horse, appreciating every minute of it.
My life changed the day I was diagnosed with cancer. It was hard when I was lying in the hospital and didn't know if anybody survived pancreatic cancer. But I decided, if I survive this, I want to offer hope to somebody else and to show them that there are people out there like Cancer Treatment Centers of America who can make a difference.
To find out more about Cancer Treatment Centers of America and our unique treatment options for complex and late-stage cancer, go to cancercenter.com. You'll be able to see our
I know the
results
center
for
in
many
Tulsa's
types of
gone.
cancers and how they compare to national averages. You can also check for participating insurance plans.
The doctors looked over what they needed to do for me, but the decision was always mine.
At Cancer Treatment Centers of America, every resource, every one of us, everything we do every day is focused on you, our patient, your treatment, your healing, your survival.
After cancer now, I just appreciate life so much more. I appreciate the little things.
Being able to carry a bucket of water from a horse again was like running a marathon. Not 1 hour goes by that I don't stop and think about how fortunate I was to have found CTCA.
Our teams of physicians, clinicians, and nurses are highly experienced and dedicated. We use state-of-the-art technology and give you innovative treatment options you may not even know exist. You'll also experience whole-person compassionate care here, unlike anything you've seen before.
When I talk to people, they say, oh my gosh, 10-year survivor, I can't believe it. Life is good, and I just appreciate it totally. I'm doing things I never dreamt I would do.
Every minute counts when you're fighting cancer. So please call or visit cancercenter.com today. Appointments are available now. Cancer Treatment Centers of America. Care that never quits.
Now that one I think is particularly effective. Just using the word cancer creates fear. I mean, if you get a diagnosis of cancer, I can tell you, having had two parents that have survived cancer, and both my parents have had it twice, it's just the minute somebody says cancer, it's a scary thing, right? I mean, it's a frightening experience for most people, and so it creates fear. But this ad does a beautiful job of creating hope. Now I'm going to tell you that if you're diagnosed with cancer, I'm not sure that CTCA is where I would have gone. Probably MD Anderson has the highest success rate. And guess what MD Anderson doesn't do? They don't advertise, right? They don't. As far as I know, MD Anderson doesn't advertise. CTCA as a was, if they're still around at all, they are a for-profit institution. Whereas MD Anderson is affiliated with a research university. So yeah, I think, but from an ad standpoint, this does a beautiful job. There's this fear out here. If you have it, I think that's real. And they provide hope. And they combine this with some wonderful symbolism, right? Again, going back to, there's nothing more iconic. So what is Peggy doing in this ad? She's out in the beautiful, lush mountain, scenery, riding her horse. I mean, how American is that? You've got horses, campfires. I mean, this is the complete package here. I think it's an effective ad. Do I think it's an ethical ad? Not so sure about that, right? So,
in this chapter, we look at the final two P's of the marketing mix: promotion.
do that, do that. So, what are these issues? Wrong side. There we go. What do these issues have? So one of the discussion cases in the textbook from years ago was about direct-to-consumer advertising in the pharmaceutical industry. America is one of only 2 countries that allows for D2C advertising of pharmaceutical products and things like CTCA, medical devices or medical treatments. The other country that allows this is New Zealand. So it makes us really unique in the world. 2 countries, every place else doesn't allow you to do advertising to consumer of these kinds of products. So claims made by producers are obviously going to be really important, and these involve issues of autonomy. Now, with regard to issues of autonomy, what we're looking for is, and what the textbook suggests, which I disagree with, and almost all textbooks talk about this, they say things in ethics like autonomy is not something that you have one moment and not the next, that it's fleeting, that it's something that comes and goes. And I don't think that's true. I think, for example, you are capable of making autonomous good decisions in one context of your life, whereas you may not be capable of doing that in another context of your life. And let's just take the cancer example as something that is sort of relevant. When you get a diagnosis of cancer, and again, having had an experience with this in my family, and both of my parents are enormously bright, sharp, alert, chirpy people, right? Highly educated. It's an emotional experience. And you may not be able to make the best decisions with regard to that issue as somebody who doesn't have cancer for you. But you may still be able to function in other areas of your life. My mother owns a business, and she continued to run that business the entire time she went through cancer treatment. And I think she was an effective business owner. So I think you can have autonomy. You can make business decisions in an autonomous fashion, but maybe not make great decisions with regard to your treatment options. One of the things that I think advertising does is things like, Peggy, you sit there and you say, and you have this emotional connection. Here's a rather pleasant looking woman. She's talking about the fact that she had pancreatic cancer and she survived it and she went to CTCA. And isn't that overall, and the decision was always fine. You know, the doctors told me what they could do for me, but it was always up to me. All of that is really nice and it's comforting, but I'm not sure that that's the best method of making decisions when you're in that kind of situation. So the test, I think, for autonomy, and I think the law has come up with a good test in Anglo-American jurisprudence and other contexts for what constitutes an autonomous decision. And one of the things that I look at in my research stream is, and it's trying to make these connections against maybe disparate activities and disciplines, but when you find something that you can use from another discipline, I think that that's useful. So what is the test for autonomy? Well, if we look at Fourth Amendment jurisprudence in the United States, I think the courts come up with a really good idea about what is an autonomous decision. So what is Fourth Amendment jurisprudence? Well, we have this thing in the United States Constitution called the Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights has 10 substantive amendments to the United States Constitution. So after the Constitution was ratified, one of the things that happened in the debates was there was an argument that the Constitution was flawed because it didn't include a Bill of Rights or a limitation on sovereign power. And so in order to get it passed, the founding fathers agreed that they would take up this challenge, and the first Congress did in fact take it up, and they passed 10 substantive rights in the Bill of Rights that either applied to the states or to the people respectively. One of the most important of these is the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment prohibits unreasonable searches and seizures of individuals. Under the British system, the government could just sort of come into your home and ransack things and find and charge you with seditious conspiracy or all of these things against, have a lot of recourse. The is not one document the way it is sort of in the United States. Compilation of documents that go back to what's called Magna Carta, which is sort of the first taking away of power from the king. But in the United States, we have this document, and we had, as a result of this debate, the first 10 amendments, and one of these substantive amendments is the prohibition against unreasonable search and seizure. The courts come up with a really good test, and I think we can apply it to advertising with regard to what constitutes a voluntary waiver of this very fundamental right. So the Fourth Amendment, the right of the people to be secure in their papers, places, persons, and effects shall not be violated, except upon good cause and supported by, a petition for a search warrant, or, there's exceptions to the search warrant requirement in various instances. But one of the things that we can do is we can look at waiver. And so the vast majority of police searches that actually occur, you would think, looking at the Constitution, that the vast majority of police searches occur as a result of the police going to a neutral magistrate, presenting the facts, and saying, we have reason to believe, which is called probable cause, that individual X has committed a crime, and these are the reasons that we believe this, and we would like a warrant. This has happened to our former president, right? If you followed the news at all, Donald Trump, he calls it a raid. That's an inappropriate term for what happened. The government executed a search warrant. It wasn't a raid. Raid implies like not, a hostile overtaking of a property. That's not what happens when a search warrant is executed. The search warrant is executed in very, specific manner, and they show up and they knock on the door usually, unless they have a no-knock warrant. You open the door and they go through and they meticulously search for the things that they're supposed to be looking for, which the search warrant itself limits what you can look for. So you can't look. So let's suppose you're accused of stealing a car. You can't start searching the bedroom of a home for a stolen car, right? Searches are limited in scope and temporal scope to the places that reasonably may hide or conceal the items that they're searching for. Now, the vast majority of searches don't actually occur as a result of a search warrant. Homes are almost always search warrant, but the vast majority of searches actually occur probably from traffic stops. That's the biggest one, and they almost never have a warrant. And how do they get the right to search? Well, there's a number of ways. One of these ways that they can get the right to search is by asking you. You're stopped on the side of the road, and they say things like, would you mind if we search your car? And you're at a disadvantage in this situation, because the person asking you, can we search your car, has a gun. This puts you at a disadvantage. So the court comes up with this test as to whether or not, and police officers say, we asked, and he said, why, we could search, absolutely. And the court starts looking at this and says, when does an ask become not so much of an ask, such that, and the critical test is the will overborne? Now, this is why it has to do with issues of autonomy. Is the will overborne? Now, with regard to advertising, you don't have to have a gun to have the will overborne. But I think these tests that the court talks about in Fourth Amendment jurisprudence are applicable even to these other contexts. So when is the will overborne? What constitutes a voluntary relinquishment of your right? Well, there's a three-pronged test, right? One, that it's knowing. Right? That the person knows what's going on. This is the lowest part of the test. You're conscious, you're awake. That's easy to establish, right? When are you not knowing? Now, a lot of searches actually take place where this part maybe not, but we're not talking about a waiver in those instances. I'll give you an example. You go out to the bar and I have had lots, as a lawyer, I've had lots of clients that have done this. You have a few too many and you pass out in your car. And the police try and wake you up and you can't wake up. And so they just draw a sample of blood. They take you to the hospital and they draw a sample of blood. You don't knowingly, you didn't give consent. You don't have awareness, right? In that instance. But most of these searches that take place in cars particularly don't necessarily involve DUI. They involve looking for drugs. We're just until recently, we were just fascinated by finding drugs. We've become less fascinated as the people have spoken and have said, we really think that that ought to be legal, particularly with regard to marijuana. And the state of Oklahoma has the most liberal medical marijuana. You can have recreational marijuana, which is what they have in Colorado, which is more liberal than what we've got. But as far as medical, we've got the most liberal medical marijuana law in the nation. Most places that have only medical marijuana and not recreational, they limit what you can get marijuana for. In Oklahoma, you can literally go in and say, oh, I've got pain from a hangnail. And a doctor can, there's no limit on what they can write script for, as I understand it, for medical marijuana. So knowing this is the lowest prong of the test. Am I conscious? Am I aware? Am I able to respond to the officer's questions? Even if I'm impaired, can I, yes. Do you know what day it is? Do you know what time it is? Do you know who the president of the United? Those are all things that indicate whether or not you are knowing. You could even be awake and not know. I mean, if you have Alzheimer's, severe Alzheimer's or something like that, it may not be a knowing deal because you don't understand or you're incapable of fully appreciating the context. But basically, 99% of the time, it's like, are you awake? Can you respond to commands? When I told you to get out of the car, you did. Things like that. That constitutes knowing. Very low prong. The second prong, voluntary. What constitutes voluntary? In the past, these cases are documented. I'm not, making up stuff. I've studied the law. The police would interrogate you. And there used to be these items that every household had called a phone book. You all have never seen these. You've never seen one, probably, in your whole life. Have you?
Big phone books?
Yeah, big phone book.
Big
Yeah.
yellow one?
Yeah, there used to be this thing before we had this device, which could look up every number that we don't want to use because this device is inappropriately named. They call it a cell phone. It ought to be called a toy or a personal organizer or a digital communication device because we don't actually talk. Your generation particularly, my generation liked to talk on the phone. That was a big deal. We had phones and we would call our friends and we'd sit there and we'd talk for hours to our friends on the phone. You don't actually want to do that. You want to text, right? So nobody actually uses this device to talk anymore, or very rarely. It's mostly about texting or playing games or talking to Siri and figuring out where it is that you want to go to get your next meal or whatever. So it's voluntary, but they used to have these things in the olden times. Before you could look everything up on this device, people had these things that were attached to the wall that were called phones. They hung on the wall or they sat on your desk and they had a cord and they were wired. And you would actually, if you wanted to know, if you had a plumbing problem, you'd go to the phone book. You'd go to the yellow pages and you'd go to P for plumbing and you would look up plumbers who advertised and they were listed both, they have these big page ads and a half page, quarter page, eighth page ad. And then they also listed the numbers kind of in a column on the right, alphabetically. There were two things to the phone book. In big communities like Oklahoma City, the phone book came in two parts. There was what we call the white pages, and those were residential listings for the most part. Those were everybody who had a phone unless you requested the phone company not list your number, you were listed. So you could go to a city, and if you were looking for your relatives, your long lost relatives, you'd go to the phone book. This was the old fashioned form of Google, and you'd try to find them. You'd go to, if you wanted to find me, you'd go to A for Aguirre, and you'd go down and you'd look for the number. Nobody does that anymore, right? Like they don't exist really, because nobody has this thing attached to the wall. But so, these were, particularly in large communities, these yellow pages were thick and heavy tomes because people advertised in them. So one of the things that police officers in the past used to do is, you'd sit in the interrogation room. Did you commit the murder? No, I didn't commit the murder. They take the big heavy yellow pages phone book and whap right upside the head. When I used to teach criminal law and procedure, it was fascinating to me how all of the cops, everybody in that class was a cop or wanted to be a cop. That was who took my class, criminal law and procedure. And they always wanted to know, if they do this, can I tase them? When I started teaching the class, it was before tasers became really popular. So they wanted to know if they could, billy club them, hit them with the billy club. But, they'd take you in the interrogation room and no, I didn't do it. And somebody whap you upside the head with a phone book. Why do you use a phone book? Because thick and heavy doesn't leave a mark. Right? Yeah, it's thick and heavy, doesn't leave a mark. You can also beat people with a rubber hose, doesn't leave a mark. Right? If I hit you upside the head with a phone book enough times, you may be aware of what's going on, but is that confession voluntary? I don't think it is. This is clear. Like, if I'm hitting you upside, at some point in time, if you get hit upside the head with the phone book enough, you're going to want it to stop, and you might confess to something you didn't do. So, the second prong is kind of easy. Like, we took him into the interrogation room and we offered him a cup of coffee and we sat there and we had a civil conversation. No phone book involved, no rubber hose involved, nothing like that, right? None of that involved. Then we get to the third prong of the test. Is it intelligent? This is the most difficult one with regard to autonomy. Is it an intelligent choice to waive the right? Famous case. Officers, there used to be these things that people traveled on. They're still in business. I saw one for the first time in years the other day, a Greyhound bus. People used to actually travel on these things. Planes were very expensive. They're fast, but they were expensive. When I was a kid, I remember the first, I think I told you all in the past, I have a commercial pilot's license. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be an airline transport pilot. That didn't work out for me because I graduated high school in 1992 when Bill Clinton was elected president. The Berlin Wall had fallen. The world was at peace. There was a guy named Francis Fukuyama, I think, who wrote an article called The End of History, arguing that we reached the point where society had become fully civilized and we were going to see the withering away, I guess, of the state. And we were not going to have any more history, which, it's amazing how much history we've had since then. But in 1992, it was sort of a kumbaya moment and the military was downsizing and I went to the Air Force ROTC and even though I'd started flying, taking lessons when I was 8 years old. So I had literally almost 1,000 hours by the time I got to college. And I couldn't get a pilot spot in the Air Force or the Navy. The way you sort of became an airline transport pilot in the past was you went into the Air Force or you went into the Navy and you flew heavies, not jets, you flew heavies. And that's how you got enough hours to go into the private sector. So 1992, the military's downsizing. I wasn't going to get a pilot slot. So people used to ride around at this point in time on these things called buses because, you know, in the past, there were sort of three ways to get around. There was airplane, expensive, there was bus, which was less expensive, and there was, you know, or bus or car, and there was rail. Lots of people didn't have cars that would make it past the edge of town because in the 1980s, for example, when I was growing up, cars were horribly unreliable. I mean, like they just made really bad cars, particularly American cars. They broke down. People now say things like, they don't make them like they used to. And it's like, well, thank God. My truck has 140,000 miles on it, and it's a 2015. We've taken it all over the planet. And it's still, you know, I don't worry every day when I go out and start my car. And in the 80s, we did. You'd worry like, is it going to start today? Is it going to blow up? What, you know, and they're much better. So there was bus or car, there was train. Trains are sort of inconvenient. They stop at a lot of places. They're not fast. They're not direct. So a lot of people rode buses. In the 1980s, sheriff's deputies, particularly in border towns in Texas and places like that, where there's a lot of immigrants, and this one occurred in a stop in Florida, would get on the bus and go around and ask people if they could search their luggage. One of these bus stops involved officers in Florida. They boarded a bus, pick out individuals that they think are suspicious, and then ask if they can search their luggage. One of these individuals that they searched, this is what they said. This is what the court says. The officers board the bus. One officer is holding, I believe it was a firearm, a shotgun, and another officer had a pistol in a bag that he was holding on his chest. And they go and ask people, can I search your luggage? Now, this third prong of intelligence comes in. And oddly enough, one of the people that they searched said, sure, you can search my luggage. Now you're sitting on a bus down, the officer is standing, there are three of them, one of whom has, you know, this pistol in a case that he's holding, and they're asking you, can I search your luggage? And the individual says yes. And the court says that's an intelligent decision. Now, the facts are important here. You're sitting down. If you're on a bus, you're probably not. I will tell you that I rode buses in the 1980s only because my parents, my mother and my father were divorced. They couldn't stand to see each other. So my dad lived in Albuquerque. My mother lived in Santa Fe. My mom would put me on a bus from Santa Fe to Albuquerque, and she would make sure I got on the bus, and my father would meet me at the bus station in Albuquerque. That's how they did the trade-off, because they just hated each other so much, right? And it was a 50-minute trip. There's no stops in between, so it was relatively safe. But I'm going to tell you, I never went cross country on a bus. The people that went cross country on buses were not the intelligentsia of our society, for the most part. By and large, on the whole, there are people who had unreliable transportation. Now, all the transportation in the 1980s was unreliable, but they couldn't afford an airline. These are not people that got PhDs. They're not people like me who have a JD and a PhD. By and large, on the whole, for the most, there are exceptions, right? They're poor. An officer has a badge on. They're wearing SWAT uniforms. One of them is holding a gun. You're sitting down, and they're now asking you if they can search your luggage. And the court says, of course. And the person says, yes. And the court says, of course, that's intelligent. Of course, they were conscious. They knew what was going on. The officer wasn't hitting them upside the head with a phone book. So it was voluntary. Of course, it was intelligent, because everybody knows that a question is a question. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that a question is a question. So of course it was, of course it was knowing and voluntary and intelligent. When I first started teaching, I had a split appointment. I was in the office of the legal counsel and I also taught. At that point in time, my boss and I had our own administrative assistant. Her name was Brandy. And every day after class, when I would finish with class, I used to pass out a roll sheet. This was before COVID and things like that. I used to pass out a roll sheet and I would bring it back. And before class, I would say, or after class, I would say, Brandy, would you mind updating I had columns in the grade book for attendance. Would you mind updating my grade book for attendance? And she'd say, she called me Dr. Grantley because she couldn't pronounce my last name. She'd say, sure, Dr. Grantley, I'd be happy to do that. Was that a question? I phrased it like a question because we're polite, but it wasn't really a question, was it? Because if she didn't want to do it, she could get her ass up and go find another job, right? Sounds like, and the court says it's a question. Everybody knows that a question's a question. But is it really? The man with the badge holding a gun standing over you, is that really a question? Most of the people who are on these buses are not steeped in Anglo-American Fourth Amendment jurisprudence the way I am. I've had horses and cattle all my life. My father owns a cattle ranch in northern New Mexico. I have driven pickups all my life. One of the pickups that I used to have, that I used to go out and feed horses in, was this crappy little S10 pickup that I bought. Didn't have the same color doors because the doors have been replaced. It was banged up on every conceivable. I get stopped out on the Kilpatrick Turnpike for speeding. I'm going to a doctor's appointment. I think if I pay for it, I should be able to go as fast as I want. When I was a younger person, I used to drive really, really fast. And this cop, I'll never forget her name. It is like emblazoned on my mind. Her name is Tommy, T-O-M-M-I. It's a female, Tommy Copps, C-O-P-P-S. I get pulled over for speeding on the turnpike. She comes up to the car, rolls down the window. Would you get out of your car, sir, and come sit with me? I don't want to get out of my car. It's not a question. You're going to come sit in the car. And they put you in the car so that you're on their turf and they, can't get a gun, reach for it. And she's writing me a ticket. And she looks at my last name, which is obviously not a white name, right? I mean, like, it's not Smith or Jones. And she says, what derivation of name is that? I'm like, what? What derivation? And I'm like, what? I don't even think that's a word. Where are you from? Somewhere where we don't end sentences with prepositions. What kind of name is that? I'm Hispanic. Where do you work? That's one of the questions I ask. The University of Central Oklahoma. You part of the custodial staff there? No, I'm a professor. And she says, can I search your car? Because, obviously, Hispanic male driving crappy car must be carrying drugs. That's called racial profiling, by the way, right? Yeah. And I said, no. So she starts with I won't give you a ticket if you let me search your car. No. Don't try and bribe me. I'm a lawyer, right? Like, don't try and bribe me. Most people in that situation have not had an entire course in criminal procedure at a law school where you delve into these situations in great detail. And so what do you think? You're sitting in their car, they have a gun, you're on a bus, they're standing over you, they have a gun, they have a badge, they can take you to jail. You don't think that you have much choice. It may be phrased like a question, but most people don't think they have a choice in that situation. And so I would argue that that's not intelligent. Now let's apply this to advertising. Okay, you see the ad, you're awake, you know. You call up CTCA. Is it voluntary? Okay, yeah. You could call up someplace else. Is it intelligent? I don't think it is. You've just gotten a diagnosis of cancer. You don't think you have a lot of options. You don't think you have a lot of choices. You see an ad for CTCA and you see Peggy, who is a 10-year survivor. Peggy's dead now of pancreatic cancer. But at the time you see Peggy and she's out there on the range riding her horse. Is it intelligent? I don't think it is. What constitutes an intelligent decision in that? An intelligent decision is not only that you're aware of your options. With regard to the police officer, there's only two options. But I don't think most people are aware that they have those two options. It's remain silent or talk, or it's consent or don't. If you only have two options, that's pretty easy, right? But do you know all of the law? And the court says, of course they know. They know a question's a question. I don't think they do. I don't think most people know that when a police officer is talking to you, that you can say things like, I am not talking to you anymore. I want a lawyer, right? And I would suggest to you that the only thing you say, when the man with the badge is talking to you, that the only thing you say is, one is a question, am I free to go? And if you're free to go, you need to go. And two, if I'm not, I need to talk to my lawyer. I'm not answering it. Yeah, those are the only things that you should say. With regard to cancer, it's more than that. And the more choices you get in these kinds of situations, police officer, you have two choices: talk, silent. Consent, don't consent. That's it. The more choices you have, the more difficult these intelligent decisions become. How do you evaluate? When you're in a highly emotional state. Lots of advertising doesn't have this kind of moral implication, but direct-to-consumer advertising of pharmaceuticals clearly does. Right? What constitutes an intelligent? This is, to have autonomy is to have all of these things, and the more options there are, the more difficult it becomes to think about. So what kinds of promotions do we have? Well, there's advertising, there's direct sales, there's sales promotion, which is coupons and discounts and things like that. There's public relations, right? So that's what we have, and then we have, placement of these various things that are issues. When we talk about advertising, we're talking about not just adults, but children. Lots of countries, unlike the United States, have lots of restrictions, particularly with regard to the place issue on where you can advertise to children. You can't advertise to children the way we do in the United States. You can't offer things like Happy Meals with toys in them in Germany, because again, with regard to children, they may be knowing they want the Happy Meal, maybe voluntary. Is it intelligent? I don't think it is. And the parents will, like, unlike in Germany, when I was a foreign exchange student there, in America, the parents' will is often overborne because we have, two income families where the mom and dad both work and they're tired, like the kid wants McDonald's and they're crying and they're screaming and that's all they want is hamburgers, and, the parents give in. Is it an intelligent choice? The regulation of advertising in the law in America is very, very tenuous. There is some regulation of deceptive advertising. So what is the definition of deceptive? Well, it's something that clearly intends to mislead you. But there's a big gray area here. What's the difference between puffery and deception? And how does this involve issues of whether or not something is a product of your free will, in that the will is not overborne? Somebody says this is the best car, you know, the car dealer, this is the best car on the planet. What constitutes best? Right? It's largely a matter of opinion, as opposed to matters of fact. Fact is easier to check, and we allow for a certain amount in American advertising of puffery. Claims that go beyond what are actually there. And with regard to pharmaceuticals, we really do this. In America, we have a tendency to want to solve everything with a pill. Modern science has gotten us to the point where we can solve a lot of problems with pills. It's horribly dangerous in some instances. When I was a kid growing up, again, late 1970s, early 80s, my mother owned a bunch of apartments in Santa Fe. One of the apartments that we owned was rented to a gay man who was the second person in New Mexico to die of what they at the time called GRID, gay-related immune deficiency. And he went from being this really striking, strong, outgoing, vivacious person to dying a miserable death of what we now know as AIDS or HIV. There is no cure for AIDS, but you can live long. Magic Johnson has lived 25 years with the disease as a result of modern treatment. As a result, your generation, who's never watched these kinds of horror shows, literally watched somebody go from being this incredibly talented, good-looking individual to looking like he'd survived Auschwitz or Buchenwald. That had an immense impact on me. But your generation has never known that, because we can solve it with a pill. If you contract HIV today, the odds of you dying anytime soon, at least, are very little. We can solve a lot of these problems with pills. And we want to solve things easily and quickly. And so what kinds of claims can we make? Well, with regard to scientific claims, it's a scale, right? Like there's fact, the diagnosis, you have X, Y, or Z. You have hepatitis, or you have SARS, COVID-19. But treatment is based on probabilities, which are not fact. The vast majority of people respond to treatment positively, right? And we want to solve these with pills, but is that intelligent? Do we know, do any of you, before you take the pill that your doctor prescribes, do any of you read the package inserts? No. It's like going back to, I asked you if you read the end user agreements before you click accept. Most people don't do that, right? I'm almost out of time. So with regard to place, logistics, this is the oldest subfield in marketing. Historically, the power in the channel started with the manufacturer. Walmart reversed that to the point where the power in the channel is now with the retailer, if you're a big enough retailer to demand what the prices are going to be. This involves, power dynamics always involve issues of ethics. How do you exercise that power? I would argue that Walmart has exercised the power in many respects in unethical ways, because they're now telling people what they will sell their product. And because they have such an enormous amount of the market share, they're able to influence prices to the point where you're now not just influencing the executives that work for these companies like Snapper Tools or Snapper Mowers, or not Snapper, Snapper. You're influencing their ability to make a profit. That always involves issues of ethics. Also, the targeting of vulnerable populations, the subprime mortgage industry, going around in, poor and low income neighborhoods and getting them to sign up for second mortgages, to refinance their house so that they can add, all of these things that maybe they don't need. Those always involve issues of autonomy. In these issues of how do you place, is it different, putting a financial institution in a wealthy area where people have the ability to make decisions versus a payday loan in a poor neighborhood where a lot of these people are unbankable. I'm out of time, so I hope you all have a great Christmas break because I won't see you again probably. If you have any questions about exam 4 or anything like that, just be sure and email me or text me. All right? Any questions? If you got ducks, let me stop the video and we'll do that.
I think it was due like last week. I don't really know. I did it yesterday.